I still remember the feeling of pulling Terken into the cave, my heart pounding, not just from the arrows whizzing past my head, but from her eyes, deep, resilient, even though she'd just escaped death's grasp. My father, Odysseus, stood at the cave's entrance, his sharp eyes sweeping over me and the stranger I'd just saved, his voice low but firm. "We've saved her, Telemachus, but the enemy will return, and she might know where we are." I nodded, my hand still supporting Terken's shoulder, feeling the faint warmth of her body through her tattered cloak. At that moment, I didn't know who she was or where we were, only that this desert, with its parched golden sand and unfamiliar horsemen, wasn't part of the world of Ithaca or Troy I knew so well. But I trusted what my father said. We'd figure it out and survive, just as we had through the smoke and fire of Troy. Terken leaned against the cave wall, her breathing rapid, blood from the wound on her shoulder staining my hand red. I tore a strip from my cloak, gently wrapping it around her injury, trying not to hurt her more. She looked at me, her large brown eyes glistening with gratitude, and whispered something in a strange tongue. Not the Greek my father and I spoke, nor the language of the Trojans or any people I'd met in the war. "Telemachus, Ithaca," I repeated, placing a hand on my chest so she'd understand my name and homeland. She gave a faint smile, touched my hand, her voice soft but clear. "Terken, Khwarizm." I didn't know what Khwarizm meant, but the way she said her name, proud despite her exhaustion, made me feel she wasn't ordinary. My father stepped closer, crouching beside us, his broken spear laid across his lap, his gaze both curious and cautious. "Who is she, Telemachus?" he asked, keeping his voice low so as not to startle her. I shook my head. "I don't know, father, but she was fleeing and those men wanted to capture her." Father looked at Terken, then peered out of the cave, where the sound of hooves had faded but left an echo of danger. He was always like that, watching, calculating, just as he'd done when we hid inside the Trojan horse, waiting to strike Troy. "We need to hear her story," he told me. "Even if we don't understand her language, her gestures and eyes will give us clues." I nodded, turning to Terken, using my hands to ask what had happened. She understood, pointing to her wound, then outside the cave, mimicking riding a horse and drawing a bow. I pieced it together. She'd been chased by horsemen, running for her life. Father examined the jade ring on her finger, a finely carved green stone, and murmured, "She's no commoner. This ring is a symbol of power." I looked to him for more, but he only said, "She'll lead us to answers, if we keep her alive." We couldn't stay in the cave long. Father signaled the remaining crew, now just 7 after the storm, to prepare to move. "They'll come back with more," he said, his tone as steady as when he'd commanded at Troy. "We need a safer place, and she might know the way." I helped Terken stand, her body swaying slightly, but her nod resolute as she pointed toward a line of low hills in the distance. I didn't know where she was leading us, but I trusted her. Not just because I'd saved her, but because her eyes held the same determination I'd seen in my father when we faced the Trojans on that fateful night. The journey through the desert was grueling. The scorching sand burned our feet through torn sandals, and gusts of wind carried fine dust that stung our eyes. I supported Terken, letting her lean on my shoulder, feeling her shallow breaths steady as we walked. Father led the way, his broken spear now a walking stick, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon for signs of the enemy. The crew followed, carrying what little we had, scraps of wood and rope from the ship, meager tools for defense. Terken paused now and then, pointing out hidden paths among the dunes that only someone familiar with this land could know. I wondered why she trusted us, strangers in ragged clothes from another world. But perhaps in her desperation, she had no other choice. After hours of walking, we reached a small fortress in the desert, a structure of stone and clay, its cracked walls still standing defiant amid the sand. Terken signaled us to stop, then approached the weathered wooden gate, knocking 3 times with her jade ring. A soldier appeared from behind it, clad in leather armor like her pursuers, but upon seeing her, he dropped to one knee, his voice trembling as he spoke in her tongue. She replied, gesturing toward us, and he nodded, opening the gate to let us in. I glanced at my father, waiting for his reaction, but he only gave a slight nod. "She holds authority here. We'll be safe, for now." Inside the fortress was a chaotic yet vibrant scene. Soldiers in leather armor, women and children bustled about, carrying water and dried rations. They eyed us with curiosity tinged with suspicion. Our ancient Greek attire, torn cloaks, and broken spears, starkly different from their rough leather and coarse fabric. Terken led us to a small room where a group of men, likely commanders, argued around a stone table. At her entrance, they fell silent, bowing respectfully. She spoke, her voice strong despite her weakened state, then pointed to us. An older man with a silver beard and deep-set eyes stepped forward, sizing up my father before exchanging words with Terken. She nodded, turning to me and motioning for us to sit. We gathered around the stone table, and the real reunion began. Terken, though weary, recounted her tale through gestures and a few words we slowly deciphered. She was a princess of Khwarezm, a name foreign to my father and me, and her kingdom was under attack by a formidable enemy called Genghis Khan. She pointed to her jade ring, then mimicked being surrounded, fleeing, and finally being chased across the desert. My father listened, stroking his chin, his eyes glinting with the same calculation I'd seen when we planned at Troy. "She's a king's daughter," he said to me, "and her enemy wants her, perhaps as a hostage, like we did with Priam's children at Troy." I nodded, recalling those final days at Troy when we captured princes to force surrender. I looked at Terken, feeling an odd connection. She wasn't just a fugitive. She carried the resilience of a fighter, like my mother facing suitors in Ithaca, or my father leading us through Troy's battles. I fetched water from an earthen jug a soldier brought, offering it to her, and as my hand brushed hers, she smiled. A faint smile that stirred my heart. "Terken," I said her name again, and she nodded, repeating, "Telemachus." My father watched, the corner of his mouth twitching as if he noticed something, but he said nothing, continuing to question Terken through gestures about her foes. Over the next few days in the fortress, we shared more. Terken spoke of her kingdom, a land of great cities with towering stone walls, bustling markets full of strange goods, and an army once mighty but now crumbling under Genghis Khan's might. She pointed far off, mimicking riding and archery, then drew in the sand an image of a vast army encircling a stronghold. I told her, through gestures and simple words, about Ithaca, my mother at her loom, and my father, who'd guided us through the Trojan War. She listened, her eyes lighting up as I mimed drawing a bow or thrusting a spear, and I felt she understood, despite our language divide. Love blossomed between Terken and me in those moments. It didn't strike like lightning, as in the tales my mother told of her and my father, but grew slowly, warmly, through every glance and gesture. One night, as we sat by a small fire in the fortress, she pointed to her bandaged shoulder wound, then touched my hand, saying something in her tongue. I took as thanks. I smiled, resting my hand over hers. Terken, Telemachus together. She nodded, and for the first time, I saw her truly smile, a smile that lit up her weary face. My father, sitting nearby, watched us, his gaze stern yet gentle. "Son," he said quietly to me later, "love is strength but also a burden. Be careful, we don't belong here." Yet that love became my drive when real danger loomed. The Mongols, as Terken called her pursuers, had found the fortress. One morning, drums echoed from afar, and sentries on the walls shouted warnings. My father rose, broken spear in hand, peering out through a crack in the wall. "They outnumber us 10 to 1, he said, his voice calm but edged like when we faced the Trojans. I looked at Terken, seeing fear in her eyes, but she quickly stood, issuing commands in her language. Her officers nodded, though their faces betrayed despair. The remaining Khwarezm forces in the fortress were mere remnants, no match for the approaching army. Father pulled Terken and me aside, his voice low and resolute. "We can't fight them head-on, but we can use cunning, like at Troy." He turned to Terken, gesturing to ask about the terrain around the fortress. She drew a narrow canyon in the sand, a tight pass between two high dunes. Father nodded, his eyes alight. "This is our chance." He began planning, using sand and stones to model it. Lure the Mongols into the canyon with a feigned retreat. Then use the desert wind, familiar to the Khwarezm, to ambush them. He directed us to light fires for smoke to blind their cavalry, and position rocks above to cause havoc. I volunteered to lead a small group to distract them, protecting Terken as she relayed orders. "Are you sure, Telemachus?" he asked, his gaze both worried and trusting. I nodded. "I learned from you at Troy. We'll make it work." Terken looked at me, her hand gripping mine briefly before she rushed off to give commands. The Khwarezm commanders, initially skeptical, agreed when they saw her resolve, and perhaps my father's confidence, the man who'd led us through impossible battles at Troy. My heart raced, not just for the fight ahead, but for Terken. She was why I wanted to fight, not just to survive, but to shield her, as my father had once shielded my mother in Ithaca. The plan unfolded that day. The Khwarezm forces staged a retreat from the fortress, leaving the gate open as if fleeing in panic. I led a small group with Terken, running toward the canyon, deliberately letting the Mongols spot us. The thunder of hooves roared behind, and I felt Terken's breath beside me, quick but steady. As we entered the canyon, my father signaled from above, and smoke rose from campfires, mingling with swirling sand to blind the charging cavalry. I heard their shouts as rocks tumbled from the heights, smashing their ranks. I pulled Terken behind a boulder, shielding her from stray arrows, and in that moment, I knew this love wasn't just a feeling. It was strength, as my father had said.